Let's maul in the Central Committee. Let's cringe in the Central Committee. Let's bog in the Central Committee right now.
Hey Ryan, it's
Hey, what's up?
it's Mike. Nice
Hey,
to talk
Mike.
to you again. You are the stream can hear you. I hope you don't mind. I haven't
That's
put you
all
on
right.
I haven't put you on screen yet. Thanks for doing this. All
Yeah,
right,
for sure.
you're now on. You're live. Say hi to the stream.
What's up, stream?
All right, chat. This is Ryan Grimm. Whoops. Sorry about that. That's a. This is Ryan Grimm. We all know him very well because we watch and read your coverage quite frequently on the stream. You are an American author and journalist, and you're currently the Washington D.C. bureau chief for The Intercept.
Mhm.
And I've seen you on The Young Turks, The Majority Report with Sam Cedar, a program that I worked on for a while, and occasionally on Rising with Crystal and Sagar.
Mhm.
And I know that you have bylines in a number of publications, Rolling Stone, Washington Post, Politico, and most importantly, and the thing that I recommend everybody on watching the stream right now, all 1,800 of you, go buy We've Got People, which is
You'll like it.
you'll really, really, really like it. And I know that I learned a lot too, especially about the stuff that happened before my time with, the Rainbow Coalition, Jesse Jackson, and seeing how that has led to the movements we have today. So please go and do that. So Ryan, thanks for coming on, and hopefully I didn't miss anything. Is there any parts of your bio you'd like to highlight?
The only other thing I would sling is that I've started hosting the podcast Deconstructed, like last summer, which comes out once a week, and we put a lot of work into it. And it like every, usually we do something on the news, but we'll go like much deeper than you're going to get elsewhere in the media, and go into the history and bring in voices that you're not going to hear on a normal, say, like The Daily or Slate's podcast or whatever.
Yeah, no, I love the Deconstructed. I listen to that frequently as well. So definitely check that out, everybody. It's a lot of really good content. And Ryan, I think the reason why I wanted to talk to you is because I think of you as the journalist that is most in touch with the mechanisms of how the legislative process really works, and actually understands the currents that are in the Democratic Party's elected officials in DC. And so when we talk about a lot of these issues online, a lot of people are not connected with the reality of how the sausage is made. And you seem to be the person that is not only aware of it, but kind of has the receipts for how everything is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've been covering both progressive movements and progressive groups, grassroots energy, and Congress for about 15 years now or so. And often, what I can tell people about Congress is not received warmly.
No.
Because it's an awful institution. It's a wretched place that's, if it weren't designed to stop progress, which it is, they couldn't have done any better if they had tried to design it that way.
Right.
Which they did.
Yeah, Ryan. So that brings us to the first topic I wanted to talk about, which is we've got the PA Senate race. And I know that you're well connected with Pennsylvania. And there seems to me to be kind of the traditional kind of behind the scenes efforts to block, John Fetterman again, and find just like anybody but Fetterman. Seems to me to be the strategy that goes on. I know that there's, I'm a DSA member and a Democratic Socialist, and I know that some of my comrades are not always the biggest fan of him. But as someone who, ran for office in Pennsylvania in 2014, I see him as somebody who's always supported the grassroots and progressives, and was not afraid to endorse Bernie Sanders in 2016 and accept his endorsement when he ran for lieutenant governor. How do you see the growing movement to kind of block John Fetterman? And what do you think his prospects are going forward to be the senator from Pennsylvania?
I think they're strong. I don't think Chuck Schumer, even if he doesn't want Fetterman as the nominee, is going to try to do anything to undermine Fetterman.
Right.
In the past, Schumer very much would have. In fact, as you remember, he intervened to the tune of several $1 million,
right,
to stop Sestak. Fetterman was also in the race at the time, but Sestak was the one that they really were furious at, and spent all this money making sure that Katie McGinty would be the nominee in 2016, and she actually underperformed Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
Which is impressive.
Which is really what's really interesting about that, Ryan, to bring up 2010 senatorial election, is what happened, Chad, is a former Republican senator switched parties to the Democrats, and he was challenged by Admiral Sestak, a Democratic congressman out of the collar counties of Pennsylvania, and he won the primary. And the national Democrats were enraged that he ran in the Democratic primary when they had successfully gotten a Republican senator to switch parties.
Right, because basically they had made a deal with Specter, who
Arlen Specter is his name,
right?
By the way.
Yeah, hilariously, he started as a Democrat in the early '60s, and then switched to run as a Republican for Philadelphia District Attorney, this tough on crime DA. Right, so then he switches in 2009, early 2009. Helping Democrats get 60 in the Senate, because he was worried he was going to lose a Republican primary, a Tea Party primary, and he was right. I'm sure he would have.
He would have lost to Pat Toomey, yeah, for sure.
Right, and so the Democrats were like, "Well, come our way. We won't primary you, and we'll give you committee spots, and you get to."
But they can't make that promise, Ryan.
Of course they can't. But what promise they can make is that we will try to destroy whoever primaries you.
Yes.
And so they spent the rest of Sestak's life, and to this day, just trying to destroy him for not honoring a commitment that he didn't make.
Well, and the other thing that's really funny about that is so Specter loses the primary to Admiral Sestak, and Sestak goes on to massively outperform every other statewide Democrat and almost wins anyway. I think he loses by like a point, right?
He could have won. He with Democratic Party support, he could have won.
With no Democratic Party support. Now, imagine this, chat. You have a far-right Tea Party Wall Street candidate in Pat Toomey, founder of an organization called Club for Growth, which is one of the most, right-wing PACs that exist. And the Democratic Party doesn't even contest the Pennsylvania Senate seat, basically.
Out of spite.
Out of spite.
Yeah.
And he almost wins anyway. And they give it to Pat Toomey. And that ends up being a massive problem for the Democrats going forward, because Pat Toomey has been reelected. He was reelected in 2016. And, that race, you brought up Katie McGinty. Katie McGinty, I hate to get too down in the weeds of Pennsylvania politics, Chad. I apologize. I am Mike from PA, so I try to know what I'm talking about. But Katie was kind of the personal friend of Tom Wolfe, right? And so she had massive party support. Could you talk to us about that, Ryan?
Right.
And John Fetterman's race as well back then, and how he was received.
Yeah, and so sometimes this support is behind the scenes. It's helping make connections to donors. It's kneecapping progressives in the press, or freezing them out. In this case, the support was not just explicit, but well financed. I think the number is $2 to $2.5 million that the DSCC spent to win the primary. So that's $2.5 million. Back then, that was a little bit more money in a Senate campaign. That's $2.5 million that they didn't have then to spend in the general election, and it's $2.5 million they spent ticking off, more than half of the electorate, because Fetterman at the time was the small town mayor who, because of the charisma and his support of Bernie, he was able to, even despite having no name ID, pick up significant support. So he gets double digits, not enough to be a contender. It might even be, people can Wikipedia this. Maybe he even got above 20% and surprised everybody. It was somewhere between 10 and 20, and then Sestak loses to McGuinty, but loses significantly because the party spent millions of dollars to make sure he did lose. And so then what happens in the general election? Now you have people who are angry at the way that the presidential election unfolded between Clinton and Bernie, and then in Pennsylvania, they're angry at how the primary unfolded, and so you see turnout in Pennsylvania way down because you've got half of the people angry at the party, and Trump comes in, wins the state, and McGuinty loses an absolutely crucial Senate seat. If there was a Pennsylvania Democratic senator right now, either Sestak or
McGuinty,
or it was Sestak or McGuinty or any other Democrat in that seat, you wouldn't have to worry so much about Joe Manchin. We wouldn't have to hear his name constantly because he'd be 51 rather than 50. But I think that the way that Ossoff and Warnock won in Georgia this time around, they didn't run as like full on AOC Bernie style progressives, but they did not run as Katie McGuinty center left, and they did not run as like Connor Lamb kind of center right candidates. They didn't support Medicare for all by name, but they supported all the things that are Medicare for all. They didn't support the Green New Deal by name, but they supported everything kind of inside what people would think of as a Green New Deal. They ran on civil rights. They ran on a $15 minimum wage. They ran to the Democratic base. The only things they didn't really embrace are the things that Fox News has spent billions of dollars making toxic to an extraordinary portion of the electorate. And so Schumer saw them win on that as basically progressives. And so I think that's one reason that even if he might want to stop Fetterman, he said, you know what? Actually, this is the model that has worked for us recently, and we're a more polarized country, so let's just roll with this.
I think what's really interesting, okay, so this is something that I would call hopium in Twitch speak for the future of the Democratic Party, which is like, I think you're right. Like, Warnock came out and was not tacking towards the center. Now he isn't a Bernie Sanders or AOC type candidate, but he certainly didn't tack toward the center on a lot of the major issues. And I think this is a question about, like, for John Fetterman in particular, because Fetterman was famously supportive of Medicare for all. I know that he now says, I support Medicare for all. I also support a public option. He kind of takes this, 3/4 position of like, hey, if we could do Medicare for all, I'm for it. But I also support what Joe Biden is doing. And that's in contrast. And you raised his name, Connor Lamb. And Chad, if you don't know who Connor Lamb is, basically Connor Lamb is somebody who won a heavily Republican district in Western Pennsylvania, former prosecutor, former Marine, but he ran this kind of what I would call smokestack campaign, which is he went very left on labor rights and said, I'm the union guy. And he stood next to the mine workers president. And he said, hey, we're going to raise the minimum wage. But then he also went out there and tacked to the right on kind of like social issues. He was quiet about abortion, all these other things, and has now kind of tacked more towards being a traditional blue dog now that he's in office. His district was redistricted from a Republican leading district to a standard, even district. And now, with Pennsylvania losing a seat, it very well might lose it from Western Pennsylvania. And his seat is, either on the chopping block or is going to be more Republican. And so he's looking for statewide office. So what do you think of Connor Lamb's as a challenger to John Fetterman, and John Fetterman in particular? Like, what about John makes him a strong candidate, and should progressives start to coalesce around him? What's your thoughts on that, Ryan?
Yeah, well, this is sort of like 3 layers of psychology that helps Fetterman. Like, it's not that Democratic voters love the Fetterman look. Looks like a dude in a biker bar. Basically.
Yes.
He's what, 6'6", 6'8", tatted up head to toe, and very plain spoken. And so Democratic primary voters.
He's 6'9", by the way.
6'9", good Lord. So Democratic primary voters think he's the kind of voter that will appeal across central Pennsylvania.
But he does, though.
But that's the other thing. He actually does. They're not wrong about that.
They're right about that for once.
Right. Usually when they think that, they're actually wrong, and the person isn't received well in those communities. But the fact that he's lived there, spent so much time of his life there, and understands those communities and how to speak the language, because progressives always say that, look, the things we believe in are vastly majoritarian positions.
Exactly.
The problem comes in when it becomes polarized, both around party and around culture. And so,
right.
If you're talking to people in central Pennsylvania about Medicare for All or Green New Deal, if those are Fox News viewers, they're going to tell you that they're against those things and that they're evil. That's socialism. But then if you do what Ossoff Warnock did and you check through every box that makes up those things, they're like, yeah, I'm supportive of all of those things. And that's the only way that you can explain polls that show that more than half of the country identifies as conservative, yet more than half of the country supports all of these progressive ideas.
Yes.
Like there's the math just doesn't add up there. So so what that means is that there are people who self-identify as conservatives or moderates, but who actually support all of the things that progressives support. They just don't want to call themselves progressives for whatever cultural reasons. So exactly. Fetterman gives them permission, and Biden actually, interestingly, kind of gives them permission in the same way. Like when if he comes out and supports something, and Republicans have complained about this endlessly, if he comes out and supports something, it starts to code to people as centrist.
Right.
Voters are like, oh, Biden supports this. Well, that must the $2 trillion stimulus, that must be the centrist position if Biden's supporting it. And Republicans are like, that's not that. No, that's on the left right now. And voters are like, nah, it's coming from Biden. It's probably in the middle. So if you can get people to actually vote their values by sanding down some of that polarization, then maybe that works for Fetterman. So I think he has a clear path.
Ryan, it's so validating to hear you say this, because this is exactly what I've been arguing on this stream over the last 2 years, which is if you talk about policies, especially in particular, it's sort of like the $15 minimum wage. I'll give an example, so this is not just rhetoric, but reality. If you look in Florida, they had that referendum on the $15 minimum wage. It passed with over 60% of the vote. So there was a lot of Trump $15 minimum wage voters. And those are people that show up to vote. And those people are traditionally available for somebody like, a left-wing Democrat like John Fetterman. And I think what's really interesting about this is John Fetterman is a proven statewide candidate. Not only was he able to win a Democratic primary against an incumbent, so he primaried former Lieutenant Governor Mike Stack with the help of Bernie Sanders, and I'm proud to say me. And he also, with Tom Wolf, won a statewide election for, so Tom Wolf's reelection. Him and John Fetterman was an unbeatable ticket. The Republican Party ran with a guy who was basically Trump from PA, and they ran hardcore as Trumpists, and they got flattened by the Tom Wolf, John Fetterman ticket. I think they lost by 17 points. So, and that's in a state that 2 years later, Biden won by 2 points, just to give you an idea of how much they won by. And yet I still see kind of a hesitancy about John Fetterman. And I wonder where it's coming from. Do you have an account for where some of the hesitancy and like the search for another alternative is coming from?
I mean, there are some activists in Pennsylvania who feel like he has taken Philadelphia for granted or hasn't done. He's not like a DSA figure in Philadelphia.
No.
And so to the extent that some of that left energy comes out of that activist space in Philadelphia, he's not going to get it. Malcolm Kenyatta is running in the primary, who kind of is part of that
But is he though? Isn't he come
socially,
from from the chamber, right? Wasn't he?
Right.
Didn't he work for the Chamber of Commerce of Philadelphia, which is notoriously right wing?
Yes.
So it's kind of odd that he would try to take that mantle, isn't it?
Right, but it also shows the value of social networks. Like that activist network is, and they ought to be, because that's how you build and sustain communities. It's also a social network, and he's a charter member of that social network. Like people have known him for a long time. But yes, he worked, like, he's very young, and he was
a strong supporter of Clinton and
Clinton
Biden
and Biden.
Yeah.
And because
that strikes me as odd.
Right, because he's so young, what he's done in the private sector, even if it's only for a couple of years, very much matters. Like Buttigieg, who can't say, well, I only worked for McKinsey for a couple of years. It's like, well,
that's all you've ever done.
You're a child. So yes, he worked for the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, or as the kind of liaison to both the Black community and the LGBT community. So it's his job to kind of sell Chamber of Commerce ideas to those communities.
The opposite of what we want. If we want a senator.
Right. and this is at a time when the Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of Commerce always is, but this is a time Chamber of Commerce was at war with social movements in Philadelphia around, you would know it better, but paid sick leave, minimum wage,
exactly,
and a lot of other, serious issues. But, he has the WFP endorsement. He has an incredible backstory. And so I think some people are
kind of a liberal dream, liberal pull argument.
And then also Fetterman had this jarring incident.
The incident. We've talked about that before.
Where he pulled a shotgun on a jogger, on a black jogger. He says he didn't point the shotgun at the guy.
The guy says he did.
The guy says he did. The guy actually now says, I don't want this to stop him from being senator.
Actually, he said,
it's a wild story.
Just to remind chat, we talked about this story where John Fetterman was mayor of the town of Braddock, which had a lot of gun violence when he first came into office. He said he was outside one day and he heard gunfire.
It was right after Sandy Hook, he said.
He saw someone running away from the sound of the gunfire, so he grabbed his shotgun and stopped the guy, waited for the police to come. And then the police came and they cleared the guy, and the guy left. The guy was later, arrested for kidnapping and, is now in prison. And from prison, the guy wrote, "Hey, I disagree with what, John Fetterman is saying about the incident, but vote John Fetterman." So,
the guy seems to be pretty sharp and intuitive. It's like his letter said something like, "Look, Fetterman's story is not accurate. Like, he pointed that shotgun at me." He's like, "But also, look, I get it." He's like, he told that story at the time, and he's told it since. He can't tell a new story now, right? So he's going to stick by his story. And I find I wasn't there. I didn't witness it. I find that entirely believable. From his perspective.
Oh, no, of course. I think, and I could also see why John doesn't think he was pointing it at. Maybe at some point he did, and then other times he pointed, when you're getting pointed at, as opposed to you're doing the pointing, there's a different perspective that could happen.
Or a 6'9", tatted up white guy in a truck is waving a shotgun around.
Bald head.
In bald head. It like, it is quite, even if he didn't point it at you, in your mind, he's pointing it at you. Like that is a horrifyingly frightening scenario to find yourself in as a jogger. Like he wasn't there. There were gunshots. It had nothing to do with him. Like, he was just listening to his earbuds and jogging.
Exactly. And I think this story is, I think it's one of those things that certainly could be used by bad faith, or as an attack, right? I think the Republicans have tried to use it. I don't think it would work in a general election in Pennsylvania. Like, that might actually help Fetterman, to be quite honest with you, even though, from a leftist perspective, I think it's disgusting, like, that he did that. I think it was a mistake. But, listen, if you've been to Pennsylvania, if you've been on the doors in Lehigh County or Northampton County or York County, the idea that John Fetterman owns a shotgun is not hurting him. Especially with the voters that are swing voters. Like, if you look at those people who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump, and then voted for Wolf. Those are the type of people that John Fetterman really appeals to.
That's a horrifying statement about the Pennsylvania electorate, but it's probably accurate.
Is it? I mean, I'm sorry for saying the truth.
No, I mean, yeah.
I sometimes do that, Ryan, when I just speak very plain-spokenly about it. I'm not saying it's a good thing, by the way. I think it was a mistake. And I think one of the things that's really interesting to me about John is he has managed to create kind of like a room for himself in the center. Like one of the things that I think was the best move by a politician post-election was immediately after Joe Biden won Pennsylvania and the Republicans were complaining about, the mail-in ballots, he took it upon himself to go on MSNBC and CNN and robustly attack the Republicans and defend the vote, and got himself a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. And he also challenged the lieutenant governor of Texas, who said he was going to give it $1 million for anybody who could show voter fraud. And he found 5 Republicans who had committed voter fraud. And so I guess, he says he wants it in Wawa, Sheetz gift cards.
Right.
Not Wawa.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Right. Definitely not Wawa.
So I was wondering, how do you think he's handled that? And I think he's by far the number one person in fundraising, and a poll just came out from the what is that organization? It's
Data for Progress.
Data for Progress. Thank you. Yeah. That showed him with a huge lead.
Right, had him at 40, I think, and Connor Lamb under 20,
yes,
and Kenyatta down at like 4 or 8 or so. Like, so nobody other than Lamb is kind of rating, and so Lamb, looking at whether to get in, has to wonder like what his path is, because Fetterman, draws enough from him in central Pennsylvania among those voters. Fetterman's going to do well with the suburban voters who feel like he's electable because they look at him and are like, this is somebody that they're going to like out in the hills. And if Kenyatta's not doing well in Philadelphia, then Fetterman has a good chance, a much better chance in Philadelphia than Connor Lamb does. And so Lamb probably looks at that and is like, well, let's just see what the districts are. They'll just because they take his seat doesn't mean there isn't one that he could run in. There's others he could run for governor, or he could go get rich. I don't think Lamb is. I think he's going to run into the Shapiro. I'm talking about the Attorney General of Pennsylvania buzzsaw if he tries to run for governor. I feel like that's the person that's been anointed. We'll see. I feel like if you're Lamb, Shapiro is more beatable than.
Yeah,
Fetterman.
I agree with you 100%.
Both would be hard
because one thing about Pennsylvania primary elections, and we can move on to a new topic, chat, but it's my state, so I'm gonna dig deep into it, is that it's a very regional primary still. Is like, right, if Connor Lamb was from Philadelphia, I'd say he have a better shot. But since he's from Western Pennsylvania and he's way less known than John Fetterman, and John Fetterman is going to have better positions that appeal more to the Democratic base, I just don't see it happening as far as a statewide election. And if you look at the Mike Stack primary, John Fetterman didn't win Philadelphia by any means, but he did very well in, the Philadelphia area. He ran okay in the Lehigh Valley. And so his massive wins out west combined with doing pretty well out east made him unbeatable in that primary. So, all right. Yeah. I'm glad. I'm sorry for such a deep dive in this race. I think it's the most important Senate race.
It matters
by far.
Because they're probably going to lose a couple. So they gotta win somewhere.
Right. And the difference between us having a John Fetterman in office in Pennsylvania and a Connor Lamb for the direction of the Democratic Party, and as we've said, is like, I just think he is so telegenic, and not the sense that he's beautiful, just in the sense that he's interesting. People are going to want to put him on TV and they're going to want to talk to him, and he's just going to have so much more stature nationally, and he's so much more to the left of someone like Connor Lamb that if the progressives could get someone like him in, that will be huge. A guy who is not scared to stand next to Bernie Sanders multiple times versus a guy who is, trying to run as a Republican light. That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
All right. Yep. So I wanted, the other big story that's been going on recently, Ryan, is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, obviously. I know we've been talking about that a lot. And I'm, in my mid to late 30s, so I've been around the block a few of these and seen it before. And to me, it's the first time that we've actually had prominent voices in either party coming up and making such strong stands for Israel and being respected, not just being considered fringe kooks, actually getting, stature and having their opinions circulated in the media. Do you think there has been a sea change in the Democratic Party and in the media approach towards this? Or is this just, green shoots and we should, not get ahead of our skis? To mix five metaphors.
I'd say both. I mean, the change is undeniable. And it's been underway for almost 10 years or so. When Netanyahu basically declared political war on Obama, that started to give Democrats in Washington some permission to be critical of Israel, but still not that much. In 2014, one of the last time Israel was bombing Gaza, the House Republicans put on the floor a measure to send more money over to Israel for the Iron Dome and some other things. Israel had plenty of money. It was just a symbolic thing to show how much they supported Israel in the midst of this bombing. And Beto O'Rourke, of all people, voted against it. There were very few people voted against it, and Beto was one of them. Right. And the whole world came down on him. It was a gigantic scandal. AIPAC sent him to Israel on a trip to see it for himself. And actually, to his credit, he came back and at a town hall, he said, "Now you've been to Israel, do you regret your vote?" And he said, "No, I don't regret my vote." But this time, that would not even be noticed. And you have a letter with scores of Democrats on it telling Biden to stop this weapons sale that had already been approved from going forward. So the gap just between those two things, and I wrote about last week that this hour-long floor fest that Mark Pocan actually organized, but then a bunch of the squad and other folks gave speeches, denouncing a lot of the actions that Israel had taken. And in that article, I mentioned that in 2014, around this same time, Jessica Ramos, who was at the time a kind of a nobody Democratic activist, put on her Facebook Palestine and then a little heart, the little carrot and the number 3. It became a massive scandal in New York. Just that, posting on Facebook.
Right. Palestine heart, yeah.
Mid-level activist, she was one of 5 Democratic district leaders in Queens or something. There were articles in the local paper saying Democrat expresses sympathy for Palestine or for Palestinians. That was the actual headline. And embedded in that is the reader will understand why that's a scandalous headline. Democrat expresses sympathy for Palestinians. And she's now state senator in New York, and she's part of this kind of wave of leftist Democrats who rose up over the past, over the next 4 years, 2018 and 2020. So to go from there to what you saw on the House floor is a big change. And you didn't see the same change initially out of the White House. Same stuff, not mentioning Palestinians in the readouts, repeating the mantra, Israel has a right to defend itself. Right. The State Department declining to even condemn killing children. Psaki
or the evictions or the settlements, which they don't even say is an obstacle to peace anymore. It used to be, in the 60s, just to give Chad a 5-second explainer of how American policy has veered so far right, is in the 60s, America condemned the settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem as illegal, and that it transformed to an obstacle to peace or a regrettable, and now they don't even mention it. And so the rest of the world is unanimously condemning these as violations of international law and violations of the Geneva Convention. The United States is not even saying a word about it. And Joe Biden largely hasn't. I think Joe Biden has continued pretty much from where Trump left off. He's kind of accepted whatever how Trump advanced the ball for Netanyahu, and just kind of says that's the new status quo, and we're not going to say anything about it.
Trump probably would have been cheering him on the entire time.
Yes, Trump would have been cheering him on instead of standing silent while he did it.
Right. Those are our two choices here in the United States.
Yeah, and it's absurd. I think for me, and I want to draw your attention, chat, to a story we've talked about, which is I think this started to change with the attacks on Ilhan Omar, right after she was elected in 2019. There was a lot of people from the center left to the far right that kind of found old tweets of hers where she said Israel had hypnotized the world and said, well, now she's doing anti-Semitism tropes, etc. And they tried to attack her for those tweets. As she came into office, her first month in office, they did this big, huge attack campaign on Ilhan Omar. And it seems to me that was rebuffed. And that started to represent a sea change when Ilhan Omar and later Rashida Tlaib were both banned from Israel. Mm-hmm. They were not allowed to visit. What do you think about those as like the Squad as being one of the coalescing reasons why this has started to change as far as the country?
I think there's something to that, and specifically elections matter in the sense that millions were spent trying to unseat Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, a lot more against Omar, because Tlaib kind of started to pull away from her opponent, who she only beat by like 1,000 votes in 2018.
Right.
She blew out in 2020. Omar had more than $10 million spent against her, and you saw these numbers going around that like she underperformed.
Well, there was a weed legal party.
Right, that's true. That got like 8-10%.
Yeah. So the people voting for legal weed were probably not to the right of Biden. I'm gonna go ahead and assume.
Right. And I
terrible bad faith argument that people made. That was a lie. Yeah. I would basically call it a lie, to be honest with you, Ryan, because it doesn't show you what actually happened. It just she got less votes than Biden, aka she was too far left. That's what you're supposed to think. But the third party votes that were existing were Green Party and fucking Legal Weed Party. Sorry for the F-bomb. But
no, exactly. And if any small disparity still remains, just remember that $10+ million dropped on her. There's no other candidate around the country, faced any negative advertising onslaught like that. And negative advertising works to a degree. It's gonna move the needle a couple of points. Like people are just
throwing dirt on you. Right. You're a subject of controversy is just enough to get some people who have a distaste for any conflict, which is some percentage of people. Just anytime there's bad feelings, they shut down.
But she's still won in a huge landslide.
Yeah.
And Cori Bush, who has been a supporter of BDS, who has been, an outspoken advocate for Palestinian rights, her primary at the end came down to questions over Israel and Palestine, with Lacey Clay, the incumbent, sending around a ton of mailers, linking her to Linda Sarsour, who was a Palestinian American activist.
Bernie Sanders surrogate, helped found the Women's March. Actually, we've talked about that, Ryan. I think of Linda Sarsour as one of the most exciting young activists, Ilhan Omar. And I've noticed there's a kind of a pattern of practice of how you attack Muslim politicians and activists. Do you think there's something to that? Where they were in the room with someone from Nation of Islam, and then Nation of Islam has Farrakhan, therefore they support Farrakhan's anti-Semitic views, therefore they're anti-Semitic. That kind of like pattern.
Yes, and they also gravitate toward trying to find photos of people in hijabs. The pattern is unmistakable. That maybe they have some polling and focus grouping or maybe it's just their kind of internal, fear, racism, and paranoia that drives them in that direction. But that's the imagery they go for. Recently, AIPAC put up an ad with Ilhan Omar with a bunch of missiles launching behind her head, which was so far over the line that even Steny Hoyer, who had led the charge 2 years ago to censure her on the House floor, put out a statement that wasn't slamming AIPAC, but it was not agreeing with AIPAC and pushing back on what they had done, which that very likely is the first time that Steny Hoyer has done that in his entire life. He's the number 2 Democrat in the House, and he's famous for leading this biannual trip. Like every, after every election, he brings the freshman class on a all expenses paid trip to Israel, where they begin the propaganda process. It's the Hoyer trip, and you're immediately under pressure. It's AIPAC funded, and you're immediately under pressure to, as a freshman, to
carrot and the stick,
trip.
right, Ryan? Because like, not only are you kind of threatened, you're also incentivized. Like, hey, say, I've known this from talking to other politicians running for our statewide office in Pennsylvania, and they're like, hey, if you have good polls and you talk to the right billionaire in a phone call saying, I support Israel, you're going to get $50,000, $100,000 dropped on you very quickly. And there's really no other lobby that has that kind of, money at the ready for somebody to make that position.
Do you know Paul Perry from Philadelphia?
Sounds familiar, but I don't know that we're acquainted one-on-one.
He ran for Congress in 2018, and we reported about this. He sat down with Ed Rendell, and Rendell confirmed this to me, and a couple of other like Pennsylvania bigwigs, and he wanted their support. He wanted some advice. You got to run through Rendell.
I heard it from a different politician.
And Rendell was like, well, one of the first things you need to do is go to Israel. And Paul's like, Israel? That, like, okay, but Israel, what does that have to do with this congressional seat in like suburban Philadelphia?
A lot.
Yeah. It's like, no, you should trust me. Here are some numbers to call here. And, let's arrange this trip. He ended up dropping out, frustrated by the entire process. He very well might have won, but you're right. It has this influence. So to have Hoyer, who leads that AIPAC trip, criticize AIPAC publicly is pretty remarkable.
Ryan, as a leftist, this is making me feel good, but then it also triggers a reflex where I'm like, okay, if this is happening, that means that AIPAC is making a calculation. And that calculation is that the Democratic Party is slipping away from power. And they want to polarize this and make it more about, becoming a more explicitly Republican organization. And that must mean that they're looking at the field. And, say what you can about AIPAC, they have a pretty adept feeling of where American politics is. Do you think there is a concern there that this is becoming a polarized issue and AIPAC may swing behind the Republican Party? And what does that mean for the Democratic Party's prospects to 2022, which is the last topic I wanted to touch on?
Right. I mean, the AIPAC and other, hardliners are split on that question. But really, a lot of it's less strategic, and it's more just a function of material realities. Like Israel has so militarized its kind of apartheid system over the last 10 to 15 years.
And there is no peace process, not to interrupt you, but there's no peace process. So there is, the idea that the Palestinians bear responsibility is there is no peaceful alternative, right? Hamas is saying, well, we're going to do resistance. And the moderates are saying, maybe one day they'll talk to us. And so you have that kind of difficult contrast, right?
Although the general strike that was organized pretty ground up actually probably hurt Israel more than more than the missile attacks, because people forget how, and I think Israel itself forgets how dependent it is on Palestinian labor.
Second-class citizen illegal labor. Oh, okay.
Right. It's easy to be reminded when they don't show up. Mm-hmm. And very soon after that general strike was successfully executed, you saw Israel agreeing to a ceasefire. Because the parties in the U.S. are polarized now on a kind of liberal conservative spectrum, where there used to be so much overlap, liberal Republicans, conservative Democrats. Now Joe Manchin would be the most liberal Republican in the Senate, which is, I know, hard for people to get their head around, but that's a fact. That means that a right-wing government that is behaving the way that Israel's has and is constructing all these settlements and doing everything that they're doing is just going to have a harder and harder time holding on to a polarized kind of liberal party over in the U.S. And so in some ways they might be okay just relying on Republicans, but in other ways they don't really have a choice. It's kind of where the direction is just naturally flowing. But at the same time, I think they feel like, well, maybe we have constructed conditions on the ground in Israel that are impenetrable to the politics. In other words, we've won. Like 60% of the West Bank is now Israeli settlements. So, what's your congressional resolution going to do about that? Like, there's the sewer lines are in, the swimming pools are full, the schools are built, the walls are built, the
segregated roads,
the surveillance, the 24-hour surveillance is in place. So in some ways they're daring, right? There's some ways they're daring Democrats to, they could cut off military funding and other aid, and that would cause huge, economic, ramifications. But their negotiating point starts from, well ahead relative to where they were in the 90s when they were, pretending to go down a two-state solution process.
Ryan, I could agree with that more, and that brings me to the next topic, which is talking about the Democrats and their, from my point of view, since the COVID relief bill, which was larger than I anticipated, but since then there's been pretty much a dearth of real legislative progress. And we have the redistricting now. So we know that on net, Republicans are getting an advantage that will be sufficient. If all votes remain the same as 2020, the Republicans will win the House based on the redistricting and the fact that they are controlling gerrymandering again in many more states than the Democrats are. And unfortunately, one of the most frustrating stories for me is the Democrats have a bill in H.R. 1, which would make that illegal. And then it wouldn't be in time for this census, but it would at least give, legal teams and lawyers arguments to make.
It could be. If they moved fast enough, it could be.
Yeah, it could be fast. It could be there that they could challenge gerrymandering, right? Mm-hmm. And then it puts into place for future redistrictings, nonpartisan commissions, the likes of which they have in California, which probably gives Republicans 5 or 6 more seats out of California, right? Like if California was gerrymandered, to the maximum Democratic Party advantage, that's 5 or 6 seats most likely that they're giving to the Republicans. While, for example, in Texas, which is gaining 2 seats, that's maximally gerrymandered for the benefit of Republicans. And there's bills like the PRO Act, which I know that you've covered recently, where 47 senators are now co-sponsors and there's 3 holdouts. What is it going to take for the Democrat? Like, do you actually see the Democratic Party as viable going forward? For the next decade? Are we going to face the same situation we did in 2010, where Democrats lose a midterm, Democrats get redistricted out of power for the next 6-8 years, and there's really no opportunity for Biden to do anything substantial legislatively?
Unless they do something serious, that's the course that they're on. Because you're right. Like the one wild card is Trump voters. That people who came out either in 2016 or 2020 for Trump didn't come out in 2018,
right?
And then won't come out in 2022 because they're ticked off at the party, and that's why you see Republicans doing everything they can to show their allegiance to Trump, because it's not about Trump; it's about getting those people to participate in the midterm. So that's a huge wild card. But in general, you're right that if they just stay on this course, they will lose the House of Representatives. So the way,
and very likely the Senate as well, because remember in Georgia, John
Warnock is up again.
Yeah, John Ossoff won a 6-year term, but Warnock won 2 years.
Mark Kelly is up in Arizona, and they did voter suppression rules there. So the one way that they could get onto a different course that I could see as possible is one that a lot of people are overlooking, for obvious reason. It's the debt ceiling. People thought that maybe the minimum wage might be the thing that would push the filibuster. Oh, turned out you don't even have 50 on that. Other people thought, well, maybe it'll be voting rights. Well, you don't have 50 on that yet. Maybe it'll be infrastructure. We'll see. They're kicking
spending money is always
right.
The most likely thing to get to pass for sure.
But it turns out. So think about the debt ceiling. So that comes up in August, September. Where
that's Nancy. Can I say something about that, Ryan, real quick, just for the background? Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's brilliant compromise was to give Trump everything he wanted, including border wall funding, in exchange for the debt ceiling being extended to 6 months into the next president's term. So now the Republicans will have an opportunity to do a government shutdown again, right? And 6 months into Joe Biden's term.
But think about that. Why would Democrats agree? Why would Democrats shut down the government? They very much know that no matter what the facts are, the party who's in power suffers politically from the shutdown and gets blamed by the public for the shutdown. You're not going to find 10 Republicans to go along with a debt ceiling increase without the types of concessions that are going to infuriate, the Democratic base. And so at that point, it actually is up to Democrats. They do have the chance to just lift the debt ceiling. And how do they do that? They get rid of the filibuster.
Or they could just abolish the debt ceiling as well completely, because it's not.
But to do that, you have to get rid of the filibuster.
Right.
And so it could be the debt ceiling that triggers the fight over the filibuster, because then then Democrats are like, look, I want to get rid of the filibuster, but I also don't want a government shutdown, and I don't want the United States to default on its debt and create a global financial crisis. This party's being utterly irresponsible. They're not negotiating in good faith. We just have to reform the filibuster. That is something that even Joe Manchin can get behind. And now once you've done that, now all of a sudden you have an opportunity to start passing things like H.R. 1, PRO Act, other legislation by 50 votes. So that's the one scenario I could see where they could get off the doom track that they're on now.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to be a doomer, Ryan. I'm just trying, as a longtime political operative.
Money. Yeah, money's on doom.
Yeah. Well, as a longtime political operative, I just see the same patterns emerging, and I try not to be too conclusory, but it seems pretty clear that if the Democrats do what they're doing now, they're going to lose the House and probably the Senate. And, Joe Biden's presidency will be lame duck for the next 6 years, just like Barack Obama's was. I mean, there's some, he can do things with executive orders, but for the most part, he's going to be dealing with Republican terms for the next 6 years. Or we could, pass a couple of bills that are objectively good and would make America's democracy a lot healthier. And it's, very tough for me to swallow that they can't do that. Right. Especially in the face with how Ryan, can you explain this to me? Maybe I'm slow. But at the same time, the Republicans are out there gerrymandering state Supreme Courts, packing state Supreme Courts, voter suppression. They're doing ridiculous investigations into the election, claiming it was rigged. They're out there passing riot control, anti-protester bills where they give people the legal authority to run over protesters. They are out there doing all of this stuff that's extreme, far-right, anti-democratic, openly. The Democrats are not able to pass a bill that is even-handed for clean elections, that stops things like political gerrymandering, which overwhelmingly hurts them. So even if they're just self-interested, can you explain to me why there isn't self-preservation instinct within the Democratic Party?
Well, because there is, and that's why it passed the House, and why Schumer has made such a big deal out of it. But for somebody like Manchin, he's got his own interests that are to him a higher priority than partisan.
So, just to ask you, how does it hurt him? I mean, because it's not like the PRO Act is unpopular in West Virginia, or $50 minimum wage is unpopular, or the voting rights reforms will be unpopular. What are you talking about, really? Because to me, it doesn't seem like if he voted for any of those that it would hurt him politically. So there must be some other politics we're talking about that has nothing to do with winning elections.
Right. And so his brand, his brand in West Virginia is as a kind of moderate to conservative Democrat who works with both parties. You know, he would love nothing more than to get back to the governor's mansion. Like that's his ultimate kind of ambition outside of whatever, you know, post political, you know, money making career he has, which is, you know, needs to be considered as well. And so he's always talking about bipartisanship because he thinks that it feeds that brand that he thinks he needs to survive and thrive in West Virginia, because Democrats are such a minority party at this point. Notably, he has not, you know, he's co-sponsored the PRO Act. He has not said he's against HR 1. He co-sponsored it in 2019. What he just keeps saying is what Manchin always says, is that we need to work with Republicans. I'm not going to do anything about the filibuster. He always says those things, and he always throws cold water on everything right up until the moment where he actually goes along with it.
Does it.
He's not gone. Like
so you're saying to me, don't listen to what he says. Look to what he does.
Right. Yes, right. And also parse very closely what he says. You know, he said a week or so ago to a reporter in a hallway that we ought to do the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We ought to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, you know, rather than doing HR 1, which is the one that you said, which actually matters.
Right.
The John Lewis bill is fine and good. It doesn't do anything about the upcoming election. If you don't do anything about the upcoming election, you're screwed.
Well, gerrymandering dominates everything. I mean, like you know, we now have. Just to explain this as an operative, as somebody who's done this work, we have scores on every one of you. We know where you live, and we have pretty good idea of how you vote, right? And the Republicans have that too. And so when you can draw a district house by house, you can give yourself a 90-95% confidence interval that you can win a district. The map making dominates everything. Now, if there's a hyper super wave or a party gets super unpopular and another party gets super popular, maybe that can reverse itself. But 9 elections out of 10, you can guarantee a win for your side, no matter what's going on, no matter how unpopular you are. And so Democrats giving up the control of map making to the Democrats for going on now 30 years, it has been the single most damaging thing to their party. And to give an example, Ryan, Pennsylvania, we threw out our districts through the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, and the Democrats gained 4 seats out of that.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Yeah.
So
like
it wasn't.
That shows you how significant it is.
And that's the majority that they have right now. The Democrats are in the majority because in 2015, Democratic operatives got a whole bunch of Democrat state Supreme Court judges elected, and they ruled that this gerrymander was unconstitutional, and they redrew districts. So you could see, like, down to state Supreme Court level has affected the entire national politics. Right. And although we had that success in Pennsylvania, it doesn't seem to me like the Democratic Party's anywhere on the same level. And Ryan, please talk to me about this. Like, in North Carolina, you know, gerrymandering districts, creating judicial districts, and other issues. Why do you think the Democratic Party isn't as engaged in these vitally important state and local level elections? I
mean, part of it's this culture of Democrats. Like, liberals love process, and they love rules, and they love, you know, fair play. And Republicans love power. That's a simplification, but, you know, on a grand scale, like that ends up mattering. And so if you look at a map of the U.S. and if you code red as states that Republicans control and are able to gerrymander, and yellow as ones that have commissions, and blue as ones that Democrats control and can gerrymander, there are barely any blue left. Like, there's just a handful of blue states that have left for themselves the ability to draw the lines. Instead, what Democrats tend to do is, when they take power, they hand the power over to an independent commission. That only makes sense if you're going to do that across the entire country. And you can say like, look, that's a good thing. And I think it's fine. It's good. Let everybody compete in these more evenly balanced districts. But it doesn't work if some states that are progressive do it and the conservative states don't, because then you have situations where, 2012 and I believe 2016, Democrats won more votes for House of Representatives, yet Republicans controlled things. That changes history, because that would have been a trifecta back in 2012.
Yes.
Because Democrats controlled the Senate and the White House. And if they had the House, they could have pumped a bunch more stimulus into this economy that was stagnating because Obama had pivoted to austerity too soon, and McConnell was, pulling, was doing the belt tightening.
Yep.
So these, and like you said, these very little moves can mean so much. But so on the Manchin point, it turns out he didn't actually say he's opposed to doing HR1. What he said is he has his preference for the John Lewis bill, the Voting Rights Act. That's what he's always doing. He's always saying, well, I prefer this path, but he doesn't foreclose.
But is there, Ryan,
path.
Just to ask you, like, is there actually any evidence that there's a single Republican, maybe, okay, I should say 10 Republicans that are interested in supporting even the John Lewis bill?
No, like within a couple hours of him saying that, John Cornyn, who's the number 2 Republican, said you're going to get 0 Republicans to support that. Turned out after like 4 days of working all his friends, Manchin got Lisa Murkowski to sign a letter supporting that idea. Okay, good. You got 1.
Well, and I think this is ultimately the frustration that everybody that's a Democrat, even those that do nothing but watch MSNBC, is you're negotiating with yourself, and we're getting a worse bill.
And they're telling you out of the gate, we're not going to support this thing. Like, you're offering this olive branch of a compromise, which if I were a Republican, I would absolutely take it, because the Supreme Court will probably just strike it down anyway. So you take the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, you pass it unanimously, and then you tell your cronies at the Supreme Court to strike it down. And by then, the term is over, and they didn't pass HR1.
And the thing is, the HR, just to make a point, the reason why it's funny, the John Lewis bill is much more vulnerable than HR1, even though HR1 is a better bill, is because the Constitution explicitly says that Congress has the authority to regulate the time, manner, and of congressional elections. Right. So that would be using their direct power from the Constitution, whereas the John Lewis bill and the Voting Rights Act, that had differential treatment between states. This is getting down to the weeds, I apologize, but like some states had to what was known as pre-clearance. If they changed their voting laws because they were traditionally discriminatory states, they had to get special permission from the government, but other states that didn't have that history did not. And that is the impediment, that is the impetus for the Supreme Court throwing it out. So you have so the liberal position, or the centrist position, is actually much more likely to fail, and it's not effective at actually countering what the Republicans are doing, namely gerrymandering and voter suppression. So it's maddening. It's you can't understand it. And I think one of the things, Ryan, I want to ask is, the Democrats, they have issues like DC statehood, where it seems just on its face, Democratic principle would be American citizens should vote. And I'm imagining the counterfactual, or imagining DC was 80% Republican, and I can't help but think there would be 51 stars on our flag in 1980. So what is the reluctance there as well?
Same crap, same bipartisan stuff. That's fundamentally what it is. The Manchin. And Cinema doesn't have the same excuse because she's much younger. Manchin's spent his entire life in a place where bipartisanship was celebrated. People like Schumer and to some degree Pelosi, have recognized that we're in a new era. Like this, there is no bipartisanship anymore. Like and so once you have accepted that, then your strategizing changes, and that's so Schumer's afraid of a primary for sure, but he's also realized that this is a different political environment than he's been in the past. For Manchin, he partly hasn't recognized that, and partly he cares less because, like I said before, he wants to be governor again of a state that's heavily Republican. So he's like, it's like whatever,
Yeah. So Ryan, can I ask you, do you remember what happened when the senators overturned the filibuster for the Supreme Court, and what happened there, and how impactful was that on national politics? How angry were the voters when the filibuster was taken away for Supreme Court judges?
Right. Not at all. So because, Democrats did it in 2013 for all but Supreme Court judges. In 2017, Democrats.
Why'd they do that, Ryan, by the way? Not to interrupt, just asking.
Because Merkley had been pushing it for 4 years. People were extremely frustrated. But the thing that finally triggered it was that McConnell was refusing to seat these DC Circuit Court nominations and a nomination to run the Consumer Financial Protection.
And the Democrats had the majority in the Senate.
Right. And he was just flat out said, like, I'm not doing it. Like, we're going to leave these seats open. And, if we take power in 2016, just like he did with Merrick Garland, he was doing with the DC Circuit Court, which is the, considered kind of like the mini Supreme Court. And so finally they pulled the trigger and said, okay, we're doing it for everybody but Supreme Court. There was nobody cared. Like, the public doesn't care. And then when Democrats filibustered Neil Gorsuch, McConnell very wisely got rid of the filibuster, and then in the next vote 5 minutes later approved Gorsuch. So all the headlines were Gorsuch approved by Senate. The fact that they had gotten rid of the filibuster was a total blip. And if they did it, to pass the debt ceiling, the debt ceiling is less of a thing that the public cares about. But it would be Democrats avert crisis would be the lead. And, the way they did it was by blowing up the filibuster.
Yeah. So, and I think that brings me to another topic. And Ryan, I don't know how much more time you have, but it's the kind of the theory of change of the Progressive Caucus and Pramila Jayapal and something like $15 minimum wage. They gave that up in the stimulus bill. They let the Democrats pretend like the parliamentarian matters, and they didn't fight very hard for the $15 minimum wage. And as far as I've seen, like the public option, the $15 minimum wage is slightly, it's dissolving like it's been Thanos snapped. So, what do you think about her theory of change? And do you think that the Democrats should take or the progressives should take a page out of the Tea Party playbook and be a little bit more hard to handle?
They certainly should have done it yesterday when they had a chance to take down this Capitol Police funding measure. This $1.9 billion for the police and security apparatuses, rewarding them for this complete failure on January 6th. It doesn't take away the responsibility that Trump and the Republicans bear for inciting the mob to say that the Capitol Police should have seen it coming. Everybody saw it coming. It was all over Facebook.
I saw it coming. We watched it live, and I was like, "Look at these people. It's dangerous."
Yeah. And so, put some more guards at the door. Put another barricade around. You have
pretend they're Black Lives Matter protesters for 5 minutes.
Pretend it's Antifa and Black Lives Matter,
and then they would have been cleared out of there in no time.
It's insane. When the left holds a protest, there will be 500 people there and 5,000 police.
I mean, Ryan, not to jump on this with a little passion because it still bothers me. The park clearing, so that Trump could do the photo with a Bible. I mean, that it's the same organizations, the same agencies, and the same city, and you can see how violent they were to peaceful protesters, right?
Yeah.
And you compare that to how the Republican assault on the Capitol, and then they were allowed to leave. Like, they were allowed to walk out. There was no kettling. There was no arresting everybody. I mean, can you explain the logic of the Democrats and spending more money in organizations that are compromised, which is an underreported story as well.
It's like, it's a phenomenon across the country that when these government agencies fail, they ask for more money. They explain their failure by saying that they were underfunded. And it's part of this security creep as well, that when walls go up, they don't come down. I still have hope that eventually that this wall will come down. And the bill at least says you can't build a permanent wall, but let's see how they define permanent.
Temporary solutions tend to become permanent over time,
Right, exactly. And so it's cowardice partly, like among people in organizations, that nobody wants to be the person that says, what are we doing here? Just like roll this back, because it's much. There's a risk if you say, let's take this wall down. I don't think there's actually any serious risk. I think if there's a protest coming, you'll see it weeks away, and then you just have extra guards there. Like that's all you need. 2 canisters of tear gas, and these geriatrics would have gone fleeing.
Their hover round batteries would have ran out, and it would have been, yeah.
Right. But nobody wants to be the politician who, after something happens, they say, well, you're the one that, was against, fortifying this, whatever. And so the logic then is just more and more security apparatus laid on top of, wall on top of wall.
Well, Republicans just filibustered this anyway in the Senate, so it doesn't even matter.
Let's hope. Yeah.
Hey, maybe the filibuster will be used for good.
God only knows what Republicans would demand to push that through, and then maybe they pass it, and then maybe finally there's enough pressure and then shame, and they knock it down in the House.
So Ryan, I think you and I are on the same page. What would you say, first a question. I mean, I know you have the Pennsylvania connection. Do you, as our final question, are you a Wawa guy or a Sheetz guy?
It's funny. So I was born in the Lehigh Valley, and I went to college down in Southern Maryland, and there was a Sheetz there, and it was great.
Sheetz is great.
I'm not gonna lie. Look, I suppose.
Are you being a centrist on the question?
I got a Phillies shirt on right here.
Yeah, you got a Phillies shirt on, yeah.
And so I would lean Wawa just for the
regional,
the love of it, the regional pride.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, I'm gonna waffle on it, I guess. Sheetz is good. Sheetz is really good.
I've spent a lot of time in the Valley as well, in Philadelphia, and went to school in Pittsburgh, so I've gotten the full Pennsylvania tour. I even lived in Boiling Springs, which is down there near Carlisle. So I've seen the mountains to the Delaware River. And I gotta say, I think Sheetz is better. I'm gonna have to go. I know it's an unpopular opinion out east, but I'm gonna have to say Sheetz is better. Not to say Wawa is bad, but this is Pennsylvania culture. Debating about which gas station food is better is very important to us. Yes. All right, Ryan, thanks so much for coming on, and if you would, please plug some of your stuff. I know that I have our mods in the chat.
Everybody go subscribe to the Deconstructed podcast. You'll like it. We keep it fairly short, yet still go pretty deep on, usually what's kind of hot in the news that week. And yeah, my book, if you're somewhat new to politics, or even if you've been in it a while, the book We've Got People tells a lot of the story that the mainstream press and authors just don't care about, because it's liberal, it's like progressive Democrats and left-wing outsiders, and those types of people are just very boring to the media, so that their history never gets told.
Chad, I have to say, when I got it on Audible, but when I listened to that book, it connected so many dots for me that, my own activism and life had, led me to suspect. And then I saw how the left has been treated and the history of it. So if you want to know more, and so that you could be a better political actor in the future, I think reading We've Got People is seriously one of the best piece of historical nonfiction that you can see about American politics. Like it is there. It talks. I mean, one of the stories that still sticks with me, Ryan, before you go, is the talk about the Affordable Care Act and the public option, and kind of the rise of the Progressive Caucus as a real political entity instead of just branding, and the failure of them to get the public option in. I think everyone should go back, read that section, because hopefully the public option is going to happen again, and that same debate and those same issues are going to come up again. So thank you, Ryan, so much for coming on. Everybody buy his book, subscribe, and I hope to see you on here again. I hope you enjoyed your time.
I did. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
All right,
chat.
Right. See ya. All right, everybody. That was Ryan Grimm. I hope you enjoyed it. We do politics here every morning starting at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. You can watch us here on Twitch. We're the morning guy, the morning politics guy, Politics Frogs, in every single day, same time, 10 a.m., day in, day out. And we carry you through your morning and early afternoon politics needs. And if you need more, Mike from PA, we have a YouTube channel. We talked about suburbs, the My Pillow guy, Ted Cruz. We talked about DSA. Amazing. Making fun of Tim Pool. Amazing. Look at all of these amazing videos. Get in there, watch them. We have me on Twitter. You got to follow me on Twitter, chat. I'm at 20,614 subs. That means I got like 40 followers on Twitter in the last day. You can do better than that. Go follow us on Twitter. And of course, join the Discord, where we have an incredible community of left-wing streamers. We have left-wing community. We talk about the stream. We talk about politics. There's gaming content. It's a really awesome, supportive place. Direct action, mutual aid. And you can just let off some steam. And also, you can help produce the show. One of the things I do is I look at the links that are put into the news content suggestions chat room on the Discord. Join the Discord, come hang out, and maybe what you want me to talk about will be part of the next show.